What's the difference between English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing? You're going to find out in this video. Hello and welcome to the MakerJayne channel, where I share all things English paper piecing, from tips and tutorials to projects and more. So if you love EPP like I do, please consider subscribing. If you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Janie, and I'm excited to get into this video with you today. You've probably realized by now that there are certain acronyms that stand for certain quilting terminology. A couple of those acronyms are EPP and FPP. Both of these types of quilt making processes involve a specific technique, but there are many differences between EPP, which is English paper piecing, and FPP, which is foundation paper piecing. So what is the difference between the two? Well, before we go into the differences, I want to talk briefly about the similarities and why people often get the two confused or think that they are the same thing. First of all, both English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing use paper in the quilt making process. And that paper acts as a foundation or template that will determine the final outcome of the fabric shape in the finished project. Another similarity between EPP and FPP is you can create some very detailed and unique quilt designs with both techniques. Quilt designs that you wouldn't be able to create with traditional machine piecing. The reason for that is because of the techniques involved and the process involved really allow you to create designs that are completely impossible with regular piecing. So some of the designs that you can create with both EPP and FPP include things like very sharp points, very skinny pieces of fabric. You can also create beautiful mandala type floral designs with both. You could even create portraits, whether of animals or humans. The possibilities really are endless with both EPP and FPP. So now that we've talked about a couple of similarities between the two, let's go over the differences, because there are quite a few differences between the two processes. The first and most obvious difference is that English paper piecing is done all by hand. So in other words, when you stitch your pieces together, you're stitching your fabric together, you are stitching it by hand using hand sewing methods. Foundation paper piecing, on the other hand, is a method in which you use your sewing machine. So the process is completely different. That leads me to another difference between EPP and FPP. That is the amount of time it actually takes to work the process. Sewing on a sewing machine goes a lot quicker than sewing by hand. Another difference between English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing is the way in which we use the paper in the process. So in English paper piecing, the paper acts as a template, and the fabric gets wrapped around that template before the pieces are stitched together. Once the pieces are stitched together, the paper can then be removed and the quilt can be finished. In foundation paper piecing, the paper acts as a foundation, meaning the paper goes underneath the fabric and the fabric is stitched to the paper using the sewing machine. Once all the fabric pieces for that particular design are stitched onto the paper, then the paper can be removed and the quilt can be finished. Another difference between English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing is that with foundation paper piecing, there is a very specific order in which the pieces must be added to the foundation paper. Whereas in English paper piecing, there really isn't any specific order that the pieces need to be assembled in. Now, there is a caveat to that, and that answer will depend on the pattern that you're working on. But just for basic English paper piecing, let's say for a flower that is made out of hexagons, there really isn't any specific order that you need to add each of the petals onto that centerpiece to make your flower. And in fact, there's actually more than one way of stitching the flower together. So the thing to remember here is that with foundation paper piecing, there is a very specific order in which you must sew the fabric onto the foundation paper, whereas English paper piecing is a little bit more loose, and there's usually more than one way to put an EPP project together. Another difference between EPP and FPP is that with FPP, once the block is assembled, before you remove the paper, you usually need to cut the block down to size. And that's just cutting off any extra seam allowance and any extra fabric that is used in the project. Whereas with English paper piecing, once your pieces are stitched together, you don't need to do any trimming. It's already at its finished size, and all you have to do is remove the paper, give it a good press, and finish your project. Another difference between the two is that with English paper piecing, there is a basting step that comes before the stitching step. So in other words, with the template, you have to attach the fabric to the template using one of several basting options available. Whereas with foundation paper piecing, there's no basting involved. You're stitching the fabric directly onto the foundation and you don't really have to attach it. So as you can see, there are several differences between English paper piecing and foundation paper piecing. And so it's important to not get the two confused. Even though they both use paper, they are very different processes. What question do you have about EPP? Leave it in the comments and I'll make a video answering it for you. Did you know that you can get early bird access to every video I make? Plus special behind the scenes content that I don't share anywhere else. Visit my Patreon page at the link below to learn more about how you can become a superfan. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and be sure to share it with a friend. Your likes and shares help my videos get found by more makers. So spread the love. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep on stitching.